The ABC and SBS are in no man's land at the moment. Both these public broadcasting institutions are waiting for the Abbott government's Expenditure Review Committee, the ERC, to set the funding envelope for 2014-15 and beyond. Last week, the ABC board reportedly signed off on contingency plans in the event that the envelope was to be $50 million recurrent or more. The board won't press the downsizing button until it knows the precise figure. This then is a standoff between the ABC and the government. We've rarely seen this situation in the history, the 82-year history of the ABC. There's a standoff on the future of the ABC with the government, which has the whip hand on funding. Now, you might think that $50 million recurrent should be manageable given the ABC's annual appropriation, but a fair proportion of that goes on transmission costs for digital television multi-channelling, leaving about $864 million a year for all ABC operations 2013-14, radio, TV and online, and the employment of 4,600 full-time equivalent staff. On top of that, the ABC has already absorbed a 1% budget cut announced in Joe Hockey's May 13 federal budget. On top of that, we lost $22 million a year when the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Julie Bishop, terminated DFAT's contract with the ABC to operate the Australia network. As a direct result, the Asia Pacific News Centre in Melbourne ceased broadcasting on September the 28th. We've had to make redundant 70 of the ABC's best international correspondents and support staff, including the legendary broadcasters Sean Dorney and Jim Middleton. We've closed down specialist Asia Pacific programming and foreign posts in Delhi, Jakarta and Beijing. And although the ABC is rebroadcasting curated material branded as Australia Plus, it has also reduced Radio Australia to a rip and read service. You can post content on the internet and call it international broadcasting, but the added value, more than the headlines as we often say, is in long-term engagement with ethical reporting from in situ correspondence, analysis, debate, satire, sport and entertainment in general Australian programming. At a time of the rise of China, the destruction of the ABC's international services is mindless vandalism and has been carried out by the Abbott government after a determined campaign by the Murdoch press against the ABC. Foreign Minister Bishop gave one justification for the termination of the Australia Network contract in a speech she delivered to Chatham House in London on the 12th of March. She said, and I quote, "It's not about the ABC promoting its news programs on whatever else into the region. It's actually meant to be fulfilling the Australian government's foreign policy objectives." This is Julie. My question is whether or not there is an inherent conflict in having the ABC contracted to deliver Australian government messages into the region. We've had the conflict writ large when it comes to the issue of asylum seekers and the issue of the Snowden allegations. The ABC is a news organisation and perfectly entitled to report how it wishes into the region on those two contentious issues. But under a soft power diplomacy contract, it's meant to be delivering a positive message, a positive image of Australia into the region. That's the Foreign Minister. That, ladies and gentlemen, is indicative of the shallowness of the Foreign Minister's thinking. She wanted Australian Network to be a propaganda arm of government in spite of the long-standing protocol that the ABC would adhere to its editorial code of practice in its international reporting. DFAT had contractually agreed that it would not have veto or censorship control of the material to be broadcast. Of course, the ABC would expose and cover contentious issues concerning domestic Australian politics and foreign policy and the politics and human rights abuses occurring anywhere in the region. The ABC would be bound by its editorial practices, constrained by defamation, contempt and discrimination laws domestically, and by protocols covering cultural and ethnic sensitivities. The two contentious issues the Foreign Minister seemed to be referring to at Chatham House were the burnt hands claims of asylum seekers under Australian Navy operations and the ABC's joint reporting with Guardian Australia of the Edward Snowden drop of Five Eyes intelligence surveillance showing that the Australian Signals Directorate had tapped the mobile phones of the Indonesian President and his wife and senior Indonesian ministers and officials. For sure, both were embarrassing, but journalists' role is to inform the public. In spite of Julie Bishop's claims in a recent Insiders interview with Barry Cassidy that the Australian network service was contractually underperforming, DFAT at no time raised any concern that the ABC's operation of Australia network was not meeting its contracted objectives. Now, I haven't got time tonight to go into other disturbing news about the Abbott government's tendency to information control, but I want the Australian public to please note that the just passed National Security Legislation Bill will effectively criminalise legitimate journalists reporting matters of public interest. It overturns the public's right to know. It will not only provide for the prosecution of whistleblowers, but also the journalists who engage with them and publish their information. It imposes draconian penalties on journalists of 5 and 10 years in jail if they expose what are called SIOs, Special Intelligence Operations of the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, inscrutably approved by the Attorney-General. This will be institutionalising unaccountability, otherwise known as cover-up. Not only bungled and unjustified operations, but also misuse of SIOs for commercial or political objectives. This is very dangerous. More disturbing, the journalists' internationally accepted practice of protection of confidential sources can be thwarted by surveillance of journalists' emails and telephone conversations and that of their employers' computer servers. Already ASIO and other law enforcement agencies have warrantless access to everyone's metadata, and soon telephone companies and internet service providers will have to store and make accessible all metadata for 2 years. Who called the journalists? When? For how long did they talk? Who did the journalists call? When? For how long did they talk? I think you'll need another politics in the pub session to canvass all this pretty soon. Although I note some commentators in the Australian newspaper today condemned this draconia, significantly, the paper's editorial on September the 29th seemed to be backing the Brandis SIO amendment as fair enough in the fight against Islamic State. The very freedoms we're meant to be fighting for, among them the public's right to know, in this democracy, can be removed in an understandable atmosphere of heightened fear, and this is okay by the Murdoch press. Now, don't get me wrong, I've reported on counter-terrorism efforts in southwest Sydney, and I know the domestic homegrown jihad threat is real, but Australian journalists are entitled to be angry at the Australians' hypocrisy and inconsistency. Australian journalists joined with News Limited over the last 2 years through the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance to resist the Gillard government's legislation to regulate the print media in Australia through Senator Conroy's idea of a News Media Council. Such a body would have destroyed press freedom, which has existed in Australia since colonial days. Now, I found myself agreeing with Piers Ackerman that this was outrageous and should not be. To be objective and fair, it should be noted News Limited has now joined Fairfax Media, the ABC, MEAA, APP, APN, Astra, Bauer Media, Commercial Radio Australia, Free TV, SBS, the Newspaper Works and West Australian News in opposing the still pending National Security Bill, there's another one, Counter-Terrorism Legislation Foreign Fighters Bill 2014. If passed, this will also criminalise Australian journalism by imposing a 2-year jail term for any disclosures about Australian Federal Police and other agencies' search warrants which are issued under a regime of delayed notification to the occupants of search premises. The Australian media collectively wants the Abbott government to remove the disclosure provisions or to provide a public interest exemption. Now, to show you I'm not completely blinded by rage at these anti-free media measures in Australia or the plight of the ABC, I acknowledge the efforts of Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop in their representations with President Obama of the United States to the Egyptian government in seeking the immediate release of Australian journalist Peter Grester and his colleagues from prison in Cairo. Tony and Julie have intervened on that, and we're grateful for that intervention. We've got other issues with the federal government, as you can tell. But back to the ABC. News Limited's narrow influence peddling and vilification of the ABC has resulted in the gutting of this country's professional and ethical international broadcasting services. Humanity is being transformed by what is called the digital revolution, where the audio, video and text content of the entire world can be delivered to your mobile phone resting in the palm of your hand. With a guesstimated 3.3 billion mobile phone users in the Asia-Pacific region, the ABC was cost-effectively placed to ride the digital revolution to project Australia as a robust liberal democracy. By gutting ABC International Services, withdrawing key personnel from the region, we are sending a signal that Australia does not want to engage. This is clearly against the national interest, made all the more galling by what I've characterised as Rupert's testicular hold on Tony. I would like to see His Excellency Ma Xiaoji's Chinese ambassador to Australia's encrypted cables reporting back to the Politburo in Beijing about the decision to close down the Australia Network Centre in Melbourne. After Beijing rebuffed Rupert's efforts to break into China's broadcasting markets some years ago, perhaps His Excellency reported, reference Australian network termination stop. As I reported after 2013 national election here, Abbott government is a running dog of Rupert Murdoch. Stop. Now he gives order and government shoots mild-mannered ABC International Broadcasting Service. Stop. Apparently it was getting too big for boots. Stop. Down Under is run by American tycoons. Stop. Recommend Beijing step up propaganda goodwill to fill vacuum in Asia-Pacific region. Now, domestically, the ABC and SBS face an awful period. We're expecting forced redundancies of journalists, production staff and program makers in the hundreds when Cabinet's ERC finally determines the future funding envelope I referred to earlier. Forget self-interest, this is about programming. This is about the effects that these cuts will have on programming and the services we deliver. I just want to detail some of the things we know. These will be called, as I said, I'm going to list what's currently on the public record and what has been indicated to us now from all sections of the ABC, from middle management, which is preparing for a radical reshaping of the ABC. They'll be called contingency plans because, as Chairman Jim Spiegelman has made clear, the Abbott Cabinet's Expenditure Review Committee has still to set the ABC funding envelope, a decision we expect within weeks. In spite of the success of ABC Television's multi-channelling, everybody's got a digital TV now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yes. ABC TV, which used to be called ABC 1, but now we call it ABC. ABC 2, ABC 3, the Children's Channel and News 24. It now appears the board, in consultation with the government, will halve these services, merge ABC 3 with ABC 1 perhaps, and close down ABC 2 to save transmission costs. SBS 2 is also expected to be closed down. The deletion of free-to-air channels for the Australian people is not back office. Our Managing Director, Mark Scott, has outlined his strategy, which to me looks like taking the opportunity from crisis for organisational change without consultation with the public, particular audiences and stakeholders under cover of funding cuts. To secure the ABC's future, he says we must reallocate resources from output which skews old to reinvest in content to meet explosive demand for content which skews young, people who access the ABC through mobiles and tablets. He might be right about the digital revolution changing people's access to content. My argument is we should be doing both. We should be looking after the growing audience, which a lot of people join the ABC, come to the ABC after their 50s. What they're doing else these other years, I don't know. A lot of young people access the ABC through Triple J, which is very successful in original Australian music and content, but a lot of people come to us later. There is a demographic gap, I acknowledge that, but to be fair, the ABC should be funded so that we can build our audiences through the digital, over the next 5 to 10 years, through the digital revolution, so we serve both. We should be serving both demographics. Somebody said after I'd been broadcast this, I told them what the strategy was, that we're going to raid programming which skews old to reinvest in program for mobiles and tablets which skew young. We should be skewing smart, not skewing old and not skewing young. Mark Scott designates networks which skew old as local radio, classic FM, news radio and radio national. The following is what can be called informed speculation, sourced from our concerned management and staff. Classic FM can expect a reduction in presenters and production staff, a reduction in live broadcasts more presenterless streaming of playlists of orchestral and other works for which the ABC owns the copyright. Very expensive to have to pay copyright fees to other content owners. The World Today on ABC Radio to be cut in half. Other impacts on radio current affairs to reduce full-time equivalent positions. ABC Radio news bulletins to be cut from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. Specialist radio national programs Bush Telegraph, Rear Vision, 360, Hindsight, Encounter and By Design to be discontinued or cut in half. A reduction of Foreign Bureau to 4 hubs, Washington, London, Jakarta and Beijing. Middle East coverage out of Jerusalem and Beirut, I hope this is wrong, to be what's known as VJ, video journalism, no dedicated camera crews. Let me tell you, camera crews are vital to international reporting as collaborators in full editorial decision making and, more importantly, to the physical safety and well-being of our people, sometimes in very dangerous situations. Foreign correspondent already reduced to 30 episodes a year over 2 seasons to be reduced to 26 eps. On TV, the final destruction of localism in current affairs with the axing of the 7:30 state shows in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, Tasmania, the ACT and the Northern Territory. On TV, I weep for South Australia if, as information there suggests, it loses all local television production outside TV news. On TV, the axing of Lateline, the late-night hybrid news and current affairs program which has been instrumental in the last 25 years in its international analysis, reporting and interviewing, and domestically in holding government and this country's institutions to account. Our Managing Director Mark Scott has been reported to have remarked privately that Lateline will stay, but I'm told its original reporting resources will be significantly constrained. It may be Lateline in name only. Organisationally, our separate radio and television divisions are expected to go in the digital revolution, turning the ABC into a digital services provider. In digital, radio is just audio, television is just video, radio and TV are so analogue. I'm sure there's more we don't know about, and I'm not sure about the fate of Ticky Fullerton's excellent late-night market analysis program, The Business. I wish I could say it will survive. And we are seeing, I think, the final withering in the ABC of specialist units like science and religion. What we're doing is stripping out original content which has made the ABC distinctive. As a direct consequence, we're expecting substantial cuts to ABC channels, programs and services. Channels, programs and services are not back office. These are not operational savings driven by efficiency. They are cuts to services. Through the digital revolution, ABC content makers have enhanced their productivity. Most content creation is now multi-platform. We write and report and make content for ABC Online, for podcasting and download, as well as radio and television transmission, at no extra cost to the taxpayer. The productivity has been acknowledged by the management of the ABC. Everybody works across platforms. Every piece of audio that is collected by a radio journalist, a radio program maker, is available to the archive and to other programmers. Likewise, any piece of video, all the interviews that are done are available and used and repurposed and build on other content. It's quite amazing what has been done over the last few years through the digital revolution. Now, the ABC has been coerced into this self-harm, this hammer blow to our cohesion and momentum by the device of declaring the main budget cut of 1% of down payment and the appointment of a Channel 7 finance executive, Peter Lewis, to review the ABC's cost efficiency. Lewis has now been appointed to the ABC board on the recommendation of a Prime Minister and Cabinet selection panel which enjoys the objectivity and wisdom of Janet Albrechtsen and Neil Brown. Now, if we lose original journalism in current affairs, television and radio, halve the radio news, drop more live broadcasts on Classic FM, drop specialist programming on Radio National, we're doing fundamental damage to what the ABC does at its core. I want to say a few things about SBS. You'll remember SBS was established by the Malcolm Fraser coalition government in the late 1970s because of the then deficiencies of the ABC in servicing the rapidly growing non-English speaking population of Australia. SBS is being funded on a shoestring in spite of this country's mass immigration program. We are going to be a big Australia, and the SBS raison d'etre has been to make the newcomers feel included with multilingual radio and television programs and English language subtitles on fascinating foreign movies. Recently, SBS gave us the award-winning documentary series Go Back to Where You Came From to confront this country's xenophobia. I regret to report that SBS is also now in for a very rough time. The Abbott government is expected to amend the SBS Act to allow for 14 minutes of advertising and promotion per hour, capped at 10 minutes of advertising per prime time hour, up from 5 minutes currently. Apparently the SBS board will be offered a choice: offer up the additional revenue to be derived from this extended advertising to the federal government, or meet a set savings target. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears SBS is being coerced into taking the additional advertising option. Advertising on SBS television and radio undermines SBS's audience loyalty. Advertising infuriates SBS's audience, trying to engage with Jenny Brocky's excellent insight, the documentary series The Courageous People on Dateline, with SBS movies and with SBS great documentaries. Just what Free TV Australia, representing the commercial TV networks already scrambling for advertising revenue in a now disaggregated TV market, makes of this remains to be seen. This is no way to treat SBS, which has made a remarkable contribution to the success of Australia as an inclusive and cohesive multiculture. And you'd think in terms of counter-terrorism, the role of SBS in inclusion and cohesion would be more important than ever before. So we've got to remember SBS, very important in the future of this country. What we've got here, I think, is an ideological aversion to public broadcasting. To News Limited, which has targeted me and my salary, I say this is not about one dispensable ABC individual. Rupert Murdoch would spill more than my salary at luncheon on Rose Harty. If he desisted from using tax havens like the Cayman Islands, Delaware or Bermuda, along with hundreds of other corporations, perhaps services like hospitals and schools would be better resourced. There'd be more investment in scientific and medical research, and the narrowing cohort of PAYG taxpayers would not have to shoulder so much of this country's tax burden. We're all hoping to see blanket coverage by the Daily Telegraph, the Courier Mail, the Herald Sun, the Adelaide Advertiser, the Hobart Mercury, the London Times, the New York Post, all news limited outlets worldwide, including the Australian, which calls itself the heart of the nation, of Joe Hockey's commendable efforts to get the G20 meeting in Brisbane to adopt a zero tolerance policy on wholesale avoidance through tax havens. I can see the headlines now: G20, crack down on these tax haven bludgers. I'll nominate Chris Mitchell for the Walkley Award for headline writing if he publishes that one. Now, we hope the ABC board comes out fighting for ABC audiences who will be impacted by soon-to-be announced cuts to services. But the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, it's the government which sets the funding lever, and it has through the history of the ABC. It's the Prime Minister who is breaking his promise to the Australian people not to cut the ABC and SBS. The Coalition has no mandate from the Australian people to do this. Tony Abbott said explicitly, deliberately, on election eve in September 2013, along with Education and Health, that there would be no cuts to the ABC and to SBS. When these institutions are cut, this will be the doing of Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, and his puppet master, Rupert Murdoch, registered office, Delaware, the United States, nominated by The Economist magazine as a tax haven. 60% of US companies are registered there. If I can just put in a plug for 7:30 New South Wales, once called Stateline, a program which has consistently and fearlessly exposed political corruption in this state wherever it exists, within the limits of the defamation laws. This program has the endorsement of the highest officials of the Liberal Party. Although I give full credit to my journalist colleague Kate McClymont for her groundbreaking journalism in exposing Obeid Corporation and its controlling influence over the New South Wales Labor Party, Our program has done all it can to tell the public what has really been going on. In 2003, we were the first to report that property developers were bankrolling Sussex Street, donating more to Labor than it received from the capitation fees of affiliated trade unions. Such was the obscene extent of the transactional slush funding over the years that the New South Wales branch at one stage was receiving more money than the ALP's National Secretariat. We exposed Labor's branch stacking, the Orange Grove scandal, the Richard Face scandal, the electricity privatisation party split, the scapegoating of public officials by Labor ministers, the dirty sexy money scandal at Wollongong. We exposed whatever it takes himself, Graham Richo Richardson, buzzing like a blowfly around Sam Haddad, the Director General of Planning. We tracked the Homicide Squad's investigation into the murder of Michael McGurk and the subsequent arrest for that murder of one of the ALP's biggest donor developers. We did not self-censor because of the powerful network of vested interest forces which have existed in Sydney since the Run Corps. By 2010, ICAC followed McClymont's evidentiary trail to show the extent of political corruption in this state, and 7:30 New South Wales covered it extensively each Friday night. Voter disgust at Labor as a consequence has been historic. And here comes the endorsement for our program's coverage. In 2010, I received this Christmas card. It said, "Merry Christmas, Quentin. Keep up the good work." It was signed by Mark Neame, State Director of the Liberal Party, and the President of the New South Wales Liberal Party, Arthur Sinodinos. We're waiting for the ICAC's findings on slush and influence peddling, corrupt conduct infecting the Liberal Party, state and federal. The report's expected in January. I regret to say that if internal ABC speculation is right, 7:30 New South Wales won't be around to report on these findings. We'll have been smothered with a soft cushion called savings. Thank you.